When I discovered 102 newly constructed homes valued at $38 million sitting on property I'd inherited for 3 decades, that power-hungry HOA president thought she'd executed the perfect swindle. Little did she know she'd just gifted me the title to her entire development. Imagine returning home to find a complete neighborhood where your livestock once roamed, families moving in with their belongings, children drawing on sidewalks with chalk, all situated on your property without authorization. Rebecca Whitmore had the nerve to present me with a cease and desist order, alleging I was intimidating residents with surveying instruments. This woman had stolen my property, then portrayed me as the menacing neighbor harassing defenseless families. What she was unaware of was that my grandfather's 1922 agreement meant every structure she erected automatically transferred to my ownership the instant they laid the first cornerstone. Soon she would discover why you should never steal from a property surveyor who's been recording land theft for 4 decades, particularly when federal regulations support your case. Before we continue, what would you do if someone constructed 102 houses on your land? Share your vindication ideas below and tell me your location. My name is Isaac Blackwood. People call me Ike, and I'm what you'd describe as traditional Kentucky determined. At 69, I've dedicated 42 years as a property surveyor, walking boundary lines and resolving land disputes across 4 counties. My grandfather bequeathed me 953 acres of prime rolling meadows back in '96, along with some wisdom. Son, never trust someone who measures property without getting their boots dirty. The early fog here in Riverside County carries the pleasant aroma of jasmine mixed with diesel fumes from the highway. That's development encroaching on agricultural territory, I reckon. Each sunrise, I'd walk my property perimeter with black coffee, listening to gravel shift beneath my boots while inspecting for weather damage. The sharp taste of well water and the organic scent of livestock reminded me this was authentic farming, not the suburban illusion overtaking Kentucky. My deceased wife Helen used to joke that I maintained property documents like other men hoard coins, obsessively and with pride bordering on madness. When she died 7 years ago, our twin sons relocated to pursue urban careers in Denver and Miami. Can't fault them for seeking more excitement than watching crops grow, but it left me alone in a 1948 farmhouse with only my beef cattle and memories. Enter Rebecca Whitmore. Call me Becca. The type of woman who wields a clipboard like a weapon and communicates in passive-aggressive business jargon that could make saints lose their temper. At 49, she'd perfected that suburban HOA leader appearance. Platinum highlights straight from the beauty parlor, ivory Cadillac SUV washed weekly, and the cold smile of someone who's complained about neighbors having incorrect fence colors. Becca was married to Thomas Whitmore, our city councilman, which in Millfield Springs meant she considered herself nobility. For 9 years, she'd been circling my land like a vulture, dispatching representatives with insulting offers for my idle grazing fields. The stench of desperation was stronger than her mall perfume every time she appeared uninvited with another generous proposal. The serious trouble began when I returned from a month-long trip, assisting my son Michael through a difficult divorce in Colorado. I'd been anticipating getting back to my peaceful schedule, coffee at dawn, checking livestock, perhaps repairing gate hinges if I felt energetic. You know, the retirement that doesn't involve video conferences or HOA conflicts. But driving up my dirt road, something seemed off. Instead of cattle bellowing and songbirds chirping, I heard the suburban orchestra of hedge trimmers buzzing and youngsters screaming, sounds that had no place being on my rear 45 acres. I grabbed my surveying gear and headed toward the commotion, assuming maybe some children were trespassing or a vehicle had broken down near my boundary. Walking through my pasture, the air carried strange scents of fresh pavement and new timber instead of wildflowers and stream water. What I discovered made my coffee mug fall from my grip and shatter against a granite stone. 2 immaculate houses, scattered across my property like a suburban plague. Trimmed lawns where my Holstein cattle used to feed. An ornamental stone gateway reading, Riverside Gardens Community, in script fancier than a marriage certificate. Families unloading moving trucks, children creating chalk artwork on driveways, Labrador retrievers pursuing frisbees. The complete American fantasy package constructed on every acre of my back pasture. I stood there staring like a visitor, wondering if I'd somehow driven to the wrong state. But there was my grandfather's maple tree, with Helen's initials etched in the bark. There was Willow Brook where I'd learned to fish. This was certainly my land, but someone had transformed it into suburbia without requesting permission. That's when Becca appeared in an electric cart wearing an official HOA pin, approaching me like she owned the place, which, judging by her arrogant expression, she absolutely believed she did. "Excuse me, sir," she declared in that syrupy tone that immediately made my jaw tighten. "This is private property. Riverside Gardens is a secured community for residents and approved guests only." I looked around at my trees, my stream, the land where my grandfather taught me to respect property boundaries, and realized I was about to receive an education in small-town corruption. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice controlled despite wanting to explode. "I believe there's been some sort of error. This is my property. Has been since 1996. Becca's laughter sounded like nails on slate. "Oh dear, I'm afraid you're mistaken. The Riverside Gardens development was acquired legally from Riverside Development Holdings 3 years ago." She produced a binder thick enough to stop a bullet, flipping through pages with the confidence of someone who'd never faced opposition. "See right here? 953 acres purchased at fair market value. I'm certain this is just a surveying mistake on your part." The condescension in her voice made my blood pressure rise. But 42 years of handling property conflicts taught me to document everything and remain calm when someone's attempting to rob you blind. "Mind if I review those documents?" "I'm not legally obligated to share private HOA business with trespassers," she huffed, gripping that binder like it held state secrets. "But I'll tell you what, I'm feeling charitable today. These families have children starting school in 3 weeks. Surely we can arrange something that doesn't disrupt their lives." That's when I knew this wasn't an error. This was a scheme wrapped in suburban righteousness. 4 days later, Detective Robert Whitmore knocked on my door with paperwork and a smirk that revealed everything about receiving fair treatment in this county. The restraining order claimed I'd trespassed on Riverside Gardens property and threatened residents with surveying equipment in an aggressive manner. Apparently carrying a measuring rod now qualified as wielding a dangerous weapon. The order banned me from entering my own back 45 acres, and Robert made sure to mention that violation meant imprisonment. Becca wasn't finished demonstrating her suburban warfare tactics. Within a week, every Riverside Gardens resident received a notice about the unstable former property owner who presented a potential danger to families and children. She organized a neighborhood watch committee that monitored my property line with the intensity of security guards, photographing me feeding my own cattle like I was operating a drug lab. The online harassment campaign followed. Becca posted comparison photos on the Millfield Springs Facebook group, my weathered farmhouse against the pristine subdivision, claiming my unkempt property was attracting pests and reducing home values. The comment section erupted into digital warfare between locals who knew my family and newcomers who bought Becca's act completely. But here's where 42 years of surveying experience becomes valuable. While Becca was busy performing victim online, I drove to the county courthouse and began examining records. The filing fee for that alleged property transfer caught my attention immediately, $75 total. In my early surveying days, I learned that Kentucky requires major property transfers to have notarized affidavits with multiple witnesses and filing fees that correspond to transaction size. This smelled more suspicious than spoiled fish. The real evidence was the notary seal. Margaret Thompson had processed real estate closings for 35 years. Sweet elderly woman who made the county's finest apple pie. Problem was, Margaret had died 8 months before she supposedly notarized my property transfer. Unless she was endorsing documents from beyond the grave, someone had forged her seal. I contacted my old surveying partner, Bulldog Harrison McKay, who's forgotten more about property law than most attorneys ever knew. Bulldog spent 3 days with his GPS equipment walking every inch of my boundaries, spitting tobacco juice and grumbling about amateur fraud attempts. "Ike," he finally said, "your property lines are precise within 4 inches. That entire subdivision is sitting on your land like ticks on a bloodhound. While I was constructing my case, Becca escalated to psychological warfare. Riverside Security. Services began patrolling Riverside Gardens in electric carts with radio headsets like my Holstein cattle, posed a national security threat. Then came the state licensing board complaint, claiming I was mentally deteriorating and dangerous to public welfare. Her evidence? Insisting on accessing my own property. The county joined in by threatening to declare my farmhouse a public hazard. Apparently, 75 years of honest wear made my home an eyesore compared to the identical McMansions squatting on my pasture. That evening, inspecting my fence line in the fading light, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Surveillance cameras concealed in my oak trees with cables running back toward Riverside Gardens. The acrid smell of electrical connections and fresh-cut plastic told the story. They'd been accessing my power supply to operate monitoring equipment. Years. Earlier, I'd helped a client catch copper thieves using an electromagnetic field detector from the hardware store, and the same method revealed months of unauthorized surveillance. I sat in Helen's garden as crickets sang and the fragrance of her climbing roses filled the evening air, contemplating whether I should just accept whatever money Becca offered and retire somewhere warmer. Then I remembered my grandfather's words, after the railroad company attempted to steal our mineral rights back in '91. Son, when someone tries to steal your land, they're not just taking soil, they're stealing your family's legacy. Helen had agreed, writing in her journal that night. Ike never retreats from defending what's right. Time to honor that heritage. 3 weeks later, Becca played her media card. Channel 9. News arrived at Riverside Gardens like they were covering a presidential scandal, complete with satellite truck and enough camera equipment to film a blockbuster movie. The story? Elderly man's fantasies threaten young families. They interviewed worried mothers holding designer toddlers, portrayed me as a confused recluse living in the past, and gave Becca 6 uninterrupted minutes to deliver her Academy Award-worthy victim performance. "We just want to live peacefully," she sobbed, dabbing eyes with tissues that appeared suspiciously dry. "It pains me to see someone so confused, but we cannot allow one person's mental decline to endanger our children." The segment made me appear like the antagonist in a cable movie about suburban terror. But while Becca was busy winning acting awards for fake tears, I was doing what surveyors do best, following paper trails and connecting evidence. My property insurance was canceled the following morning. The letter claimed significant change. In land use, voided my policy based on aerial photographs showing residential development. Now here's something interesting I discovered helping my neighbor Frank catch insurance fraud back in '05. Agents often use insider access to trigger cancellations, leaving victims vulnerable right before something unfortunate occurs. Turns out little Becca worked part-time for Reliable Coverage Insurance, the same company that dropped me. She'd used her database access to sabotage my coverage, timing it perfectly with her legal assault. The justice system revealed its true nature when Judge William Prescott scheduled an emergency hearing. Prescott golfed with Thomas every Wednesday and owned shares in 4 development companies. Conflict of interest wasn't in his vocabulary. My court-appointed lawyer arrived smelling like whiskey and mispronounced my name 3 times before advising me to accept reality and negotiate. When I demanded a jury trial, they postponed indefinitely, probably hoping I'd die of natural causes first. Meanwhile, Becca convinced Riverside Gardens families that their property values would collapse if the crazy old man won. She established a legal defense fund and collected $75,000 for attorney expenses. Interesting how that money funded the Whitmore's Mediterranean vacation. Thomas's Facebook photos from Spanish wine tours were quite enlightening. The residents organized fundraising events and charity sales, unknowingly financing their own exploitation with the enthusiasm of devoted followers. I wasn't sitting idle, though. Every conversation was recorded on my smartphone using an app Michael installed, with timestamps and GPS coordinates that would withstand federal scrutiny. Trail cameras went up around my property perimeter, all positioned legally but capturing every aspect of their intimidation campaign. The harassment escalated quickly. Dead animals appeared on my porch, Opossums mostly, though someone upgraded to a skunk that reeked like ancient roadkill. Screws scattered across my driveway punctured my truck tires 3 times. Anonymous calls promised. Accidents happened to stubborn old men, always at 2 a.m. when the threat felt most genuine. They blocked access to my own mailbox, claiming it sat on Riverside Gardens easement property. Riverside security guards threatened arrest if I collected my own mail. The irony of stealing mail while accusing me of trespassing wasn't lost on anyone with basic intelligence. That's when my guardian angel arrived wearing denim and carrying a notepad. Jessica Martinez, investigative journalist for the Louisville Herald, had relocated to small-town Kentucky seeking tranquility after metropolitan burnout. She approached me after watching Channel 9's Character Assassination, her legal reporting, instincts screaming that something stank worse than my septic system. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, "I've covered enough corporate crime to recognize a swindle. Mind if I examine your documentation?" Jessica spent 4 days independently reviewing public records, confirming my ownership, and discovering Riverside Gardens marketing materials dated 3 years before the alleged purchase. Her experience covering financial fraud taught her that internet archives never lie. The Wayback Machine revealed deleted web pages showing development plans from 2020, proving premeditation. She uncovered Thomas's sealed juvenile record for real estate fraud in Tennessee. Our city councilman had previous experience stealing property, just never attempted grand larceny on this scale. The county escalated to eminent domain threats, claiming Riverside Gardens provided essential housing for community growth. They appraised my 953 acres at $95,000 agricultural value, ignoring the $14 million residential potential. Classic government theft. Steal property for pennies, hand it to developer cronies for millions. My water well was contaminated overnight. Cattle started showing poisoning symptoms traced to Riverside Gardens storm drain discharge. The subdivision violated environmental regulations, leaching toxic construction materials into groundwater feeding my well and Willow Brook. Stress finally overcame me. Hospital admission for cardiac issues. Doctors recommending conflict reduction and assisted living. That's when Becca revealed her true character, visiting with crocodile tears and a $250,000 settlement offer. "Ike," she whispered, leaning over my hospital bed like a buzzard. "This could all vanish tomorrow. Think about your family. Is dirt really worth dying for?" Lying there with heart monitors beeping, antiseptic scent burning my nostrils and IV needles piercing my arm, I realized this transcended property disputes. This was about stopping criminals who'd victimized an entire community while hiding behind suburban respectability. Time to fight back. Getting out of that hospital bed felt like awakening from a nightmare into a battlefield. While I'd been playing invalid, Becca and Thomas had been busy cementing their theft with political maneuvering slick enough to make casino con artists jealous. Thomas introduced an emergency city council resolution to annex Riverside Gardens into Millfield Springs city limits, a bureaucratic masterstroke that hit me like a sledgehammer to the skull. City jurisdiction would override county property laws, placing the subdivision under municipal control where Thomas's influence ran deeper than a Kentucky cavern. They'd fast-tracked the vote for 12 days out, buried the notice in legal classified ads where only attorneys and land surveyors dared to venture. Jessica's investigation shifted into high gear, uncovering document fraud that made political scandals look like amateur hour. Computer forensics revealed Thomas's operation was playing copy and paste with notary seals, stealing digital signatures from legitimate transactions like a teenager downloading movies. The Margaret Thompson forgery wasn't isolated. They'd been grave robbing dead notaries' identities across 5 counties. Riverside Gardens families started receiving HOA special assessments that would make loan sharks blush. Becca demanded thousands per household to fund the legal battle, threatening foreclosure for non-payment. She was literally extorting the people she'd supposedly protected, charging them premium prices to defend property they didn't legally own. The irony was thicker than Helen's cornbread, residents paying to help steal their own money. Several families contacted me secretly, voices trembling over phone calls made after midnight when their children were asleep. They'd started questioning why their HOA queen needed luxury car payments to fight one old man with a measuring tape. I hired an independent building inspector using Jessica's newspaper budget. Turns out journalistic integrity sometimes comes with funding for exposing corruption. What he found made my surveyor's soul weep. 52 major code violations, including houses built on wooden platforms over buried marshland without proper septic permits. The electrical systems violated county fire code so severely that one spark could transform Riverside Gardens into a suburban inferno. Becca's desperation peaked when she attempted bribing Dr. Stevens to declare me mentally incompetent, $25,000 to falsify dementia diagnosis, and recommend guardianship proceedings. The good doctor recorded every word. She'd also hired some bottom-feeder private investigator to fabricate stories about my military service, claims so ridiculous that any veteran could debunk them between sips of coffee. The environmental revelation struck like lightning on a golf course. Jessica discovered Riverside Gardens was built over federally protected wetlands without EPA permits, violating more environmental laws than an oil spill. The original survey had been falsified by Thomas's consulting company, claiming sensitive marsh habitat was non-significant grassland. They'd destroyed rare turtle breeding grounds, triggering Endangered Species Act violations carrying $30,000 daily fines, enough money to purchase every house in the subdivision twice over. Construction foreman Daniel Rodriguez finally broke his silence after months of threats against his family. The former crew leader provided copies of the real environmental survey, plus photographs of Thomas ordering crews to dump concrete over protected wetlands. Daniel had quit rather than participate in environmental destruction, then endured harassment for having a conscience, apparently a rare commodity in the construction business these days. Jessica's financial investigation traced Riverside Gardens funding through more shell companies than a card shark's game, connected to overseas accounts that screamed money laundering louder than a tornado warning. The construction loans were secured using my property as collateral without my knowledge, creating fraud so blatant that bank executives would face federal conspiracy charges when this house of cards collapsed. The homeowner's awakening was brutal and swift. Property deeds were worthless. Title insurance excluded contested land coverage, and families faced losing homes while still owing mortgages on houses they never legally owned. Secret resident meetings sprouted like weeds after rain, discussing class action lawsuits against the people who'd sold them the American dream built on environmental disaster. Becca announced a Riverside Gardens Community Festival to demonstrate neighborhood support, her final desperate play for public sympathy. Politicians, law enforcement, and media were invited to witness how normal families were being terrorized by one disturbed neighbor. She'd scheduled the festival for the same day as the city council annexation vote, planning to pressure politicians, with images of children enjoying carnival rides while the crazy old farmer tried to steal their homes. But two can play the timing game. Jessica coordinated federal EPA inspectors to schedule their wetlands investigation for Festival Day. Daniel agreed to testify about environmental cover-ups. I'd compiled evidence packages showing the full fraud scope, including my grandfather's 1922 railroad contracts that these amateurs never researched. The stage was set for a showdown that would expose 3 decades of corruption in front of half the county. The sweet smell of barbecue smoke and popcorn would soon mix with the acrid stench of burning lies. Becca thought she was orchestrating a public relations victory to cement her theft. Instead, she was about to learn why you never steal from a man who documents every square inch of soil in 4 counties. Festival Day was approaching, and I planned to give Riverside Gardens a celebration they'd never forget. Jessica's phone call, at 5 a.m. 4 days before the festival, changed everything. "Ike, get down to the courthouse basement right now. I found something that's going to blow this case apart like dynamite in a chicken coop." I drove through morning mist thick as Helen's gravy, my heart pounding harder than a teenager's first date. Jessica met me at the courthouse rear entrance, disheveled and clutching coffee-stained papers like she'd discovered buried treasure under decades of bureaucratic dust. "The railway archives," she gasped, dragging me down creaky wooden stairs into a basement that smelled like mothballs and forgotten promises. I was researching easement law for another story when I stumbled across these gems. She spread yellowed documents across a table under fluorescent lights that flickered like dying fireflies. Original 1922 railroad easement contracts sealed in manila envelopes that hadn't seen daylight since Truman was president. The musty paper crackled under my fingers like autumn leaves, and suddenly I could hear my grandfather's voice echoing. Through 10 decades. Your grandfather was a stone-cold genius, Ike. Look at Clause 9. My hands trembled, reading the faded typewriter text that would make modern lawyers weep with professional envy. Isaac Blackwood Sr. hadn't just negotiated mineral rights with Kentucky Central Railroad. He'd secured development protection stronger than Fort Knox. Any unauthorized structures built on Blackwood property would automatically transfer ownership to the family, along with every improvement, fixture, and blade of grass. Sweet mother of pearl, I whispered, tasting the metallic tang of shock in my mouth. Grandpa saw this coming a century ago. The contract language was ironclad. Unauthorized construction automatically voided competing land claims and transferred all improvements to the rightful owner. Filed with the Federal Railway Commission, it carried jurisdiction that made state property law look like suggestions scrawled on napkins. No county judge, city council, or HOA queen could touch these rights. They were protected by federal transportation law older than sliced bread. Jessica's detective work revealed the smoking gun. My property extended 250 feet beyond current survey markers, encompassing not just 102 houses, but Riverside Gardens clubhouse, swimming pool, tennis courts, and that precious 18-hole golf course where Thomas played every weekend. Satellite imagery from 2018 showed boundary stakes mysteriously, relocated during one of my Colorado visits. Total theft includes recreational facilities worth $9 million, Jessica calculated, spreading printouts like a Vegas dealer. Under your grandfather's contract, Becca just handed you a $47 million gift wrapped in suburban stupidity. The beautiful irony made me laugh until tears ran down my cheeks. 102 houses at $375,000 each plus amenities, all mine thanks to a contract these amateurs never researched. The 1922 agreement had no statute of limitations, meaning their fraud actually strengthened my position instead of threatening it. Jessica had traced Thomas's connection to the Railway Historical Society, discovering he'd accessed these same documents 4 years ago through genealogy research. Email evidence revealed a detailed theft plan, knowing about the easement clause but gambling I'd never find the original contracts. He thought he could outsmart a family that's been documenting property rights since Warren G. Harding was president. Jessica chuckled. But he made one crucial miscalculation. The insurance implications were staggering. Riverside Gardens carried $60 million in fraudulent coverage based on false ownership documents. When this collapsed, insurance companies would face liability exposure bigger than their executive bonuses. Federal jurisdiction meant local corruption couldn't protect the Whitmores anymore. U.S. Marshals would enforce the 1922 contract with authority that made county sheriffs look like mall security guards. The strategic advantage was overwhelming. I didn't need to prove ownership because Grandpa's contract automatically granted it. Becca's festival would become her public execution, and she was about to hand me the rope while cameras rolled. Jessica's kitchen table disappeared under an avalanche of legal documents, maps, laptops, and enough coffee cups to fuel a rocket launch. The sweet aroma of her homemade banana bread battled the acrid smell of printer ink as we plotted the downfall of Riverside Gardens' suburban empire. Helen would have loved this organized chaos with a righteous purpose. Attorney Marcus Webb arrived, looking like federal justice in a tailored suit. This silver-haired prosecutor had spent 45 years sending white-collar criminals to prison, and his wire-rimmed glasses had witnessed more courtroom victories than a championship racehorse. He reviewed our evidence with surgical precision. Your grandfather's 1922 contract is tighter than bark on a tree, Marcus said, spreading the yellowed documents like poker cards. I've prosecuted 15 railway easement cases. This language is so bulletproof it could stop a freight train. Doctor, Sarah Lightfoot joined via video call, her EPA credentials adding environmental felonies to our growing list of charges. The wetlands damage assessment made my surveyor soul weep. $18 million to restore habitat that had taken centuries to develop naturally. The turtle species they destroyed is federally protected, Dr. Lightfoot explained, her voice carrying congressional testimony authority. Daily fines compound faster than a teenager's credit card debt. We're talking generational bankruptcy. Daniel Rodriguez arrived looking like a man who'd been carrying concrete guilt for months. The former construction foreman spread blueprints across Jessica's table, revealing engineering disasters that would make any builder's insurance agent faint. "These houses are death traps on stilts," Daniel said, his calloused finger tracing foundation plans. Thomas ordered pressure-treated lumber instead of proper concrete pilings to save money. Families are living in expensive houseboats that don't know they're sinking yet. The gallows humor wasn't lost on anyone. Riverside Gardens residents were literally living above their problems. Financial forensic accountant Patricia Goldman connected financial dots with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found buried treasure in spreadsheets. Her laptop displayed money trails that looked like spaghetti art created by intoxicated toddlers. Total fraud exceeds $94 million, Patricia announced, each number landing like artillery shells. They pre-sold 175 lots using fake ownership documents. Bernie Madoff would be impressed by this Ponzi scheme's ambition. Jessica orchestrated media strategy with military precision, marking our whiteboard timeline like D-Day invasion plans. EPA inspection at 10:30 during opening ceremonies, federal marshals at 12:30 during face painting. My story goes live at 1:30 when families check phones over barbecue. The coordination impressed even my surveyor's love of detailed planning. EPA handled environmental crimes, FBI covered financial fraud, and U.S. Marshals would serve papers that local corruption couldn't touch, like watching a Swiss watch designed by angry federal agents. My biggest concern was protecting innocent families. Caught in Becca's web, Marcus had researched victim compensation programs while I developed fair rent-to-own agreements for residents who wanted to stay. These people bought the American dream from professional liars, I insisted, tasting the metallic determination that meant no compromise on principles. We'll expose the criminals without destroying the casualties. Technology deployment turned Jessica's journalism team into a documentary crew. Discrete recording equipment, live streaming capability, and evidence collection systems would capture every moment for federal prosecution and social media transparency. The decoy operation required acting skills I didn't know this old surveyor possessed. I'd pretend to negotiate with Becca during the festival, keeping the Whitmores distracted while federal agents positioned like chess pieces around Riverside Gardens. Reverend James Mitchell provided moral authority that small-town corruption couldn't dismiss. His Baptist church would shelter displaced residents while his historical knowledge about the Blackwood family's century-long community presence gave weight to our cause. Professional exhibits prepared for media would tell the story without words. Before and after photos of wetlands destruction, side-by-side forgery comparisons, and water contamination evidence would make evening news editors weep with journalistic joy. Backup plans covered every nightmare scenario from local interference to flight risks. Evidence lived in multiple secure locations. Civil rights attorneys stood ready for retaliation, and 4 national news networks had contacts warming up for potential coverage. The evening before festival day, I visited Helen's grave as sunset, painted the sky colors she'd loved, soft purples and golds that reminded me why this land mattered beyond money or property rights. Her journal entry from our 25th anniversary echoed in memory. Ike fights for what's right, not what's easy. Kneeling beside her headstone, breathing the sweet scent of jasmine that grew wild around her resting place, I made a promise. Tomorrow would expose 30 years of corruption while protecting families who'd been victimized by their own dreams. Becca had planned a festival to celebrate her theft. Instead, she was about to host the most expensive public confession in Kentucky history, served with a side of federal justice and broadcast live for anyone with internet access. The irony tasted sweeter than Jessica's banana bread. Festival morning arrived with the kind of picture-perfect weather that made Becca believe Providence itself endorsed her suburban theft. Riverside Gardens sparkled like a movie set decorated, with enough balloons and banners to make Disney World jealous. The smell of barbecue smoke and cotton candy mixed with fresh-cut grass created an atmosphere of wholesome family fun that would have been heartwarming if it wasn't built on decades A fraud. Becca had pulled out every manipulation trick in the suburban playbook. Children's choirs performed at the opening ceremony. Local politicians gave speeches about protecting family values. Media cameras focused on sympathetic families while carefully avoiding the federal agents positioned discreetly around the festival grounds like well-dressed wolves. The night before, someone had cut my internet and phone lines, amateur hour intimidation that made me laugh harder than a comedy show. My truck tires got slashed again, and a threatening note appeared on my windshield promising, "Accidents happen to stubborn old fools." Jessica's car got vandalized with spray paint reading "Media Lies" in letters that looked like a kindergartner's first attempt at rebellion. Thomas had called an emergency city council meeting for Saturday morning, pushing the Riverside Gardens annexation vote with the desperation of a used car salesman on the last day of the month. 3 council members received anonymous $15,000 donations the day before. Jessica's cameras caught the cash handoffs in parking lots like some low-budget spy movie. My bank accounts got frozen Friday afternoon, supposedly due to suspicious activity and money laundering investigation. The bank manager, Thomas's brother-in-law, refused to explain specifics beyond bureaucratic double-talk that would make a tax attorney proud. Suddenly, I couldn't access funds for legal fees or groceries. Financial warfare designed to force surrender through starvation. Becca cranked up the family manipulation, telling residents I planned to bulldoze houses immediately after winning, leaving children homeless before school started. She created fake social media profiles, spreading rumors about my mental health with the dedication of a teenage cyberbully. Riverside Gardens parents organized protective patrols around the subdivision, like their children faced invasion from one old man with surveying equipment. The construction evidence destruction began overnight. Crews arrived with truckloads of clean soil to cover contaminated areas, attempting to hide environmental violations before EPA inspection. Daniel documented the cover-up with hidden cameras, capturing federal obstruction of justice that carried 5-year prison sentences. Thomas contacted state environmental officials claiming Jessica's investigation was fake news, arranging for a friendly local TV station to interview concerned residents about media harassment. Social media bots flooded Riverside Gardens posts, with supportive comments that read like they were written by the same person using a thesaurus. Becca hired Louisville's most aggressive law firm, filing a $60 million defamation suit against Jessica and her newspaper. They demanded retraction of all fraud stories and attempted to get injunctions blocking Festival Day coverage, basically trying to win through legal intimidation what they couldn't accomplish through actual innocence. Someone tipped off EPA inspectors about security threats at the festival, filing anonymous complaints about federal overreach and bureaucratic harassment of working families. Thomas's political connections pressured EPA to delay investigation, playing jurisdictional games that would make constitutional lawyers weep. The community split down the middle like a badly designed subdivision. Longtime residents chose sides based on decades-old grudges. Local businesses faced boycott threats for supporting either party. The Chamber of Commerce divided faster than divorce proceedings. Private security increased around Riverside Gardens with guards following Jessica while she worked, unmarked cars parked outside my property overnight, and harassment campaigns that included construction noise starting at 5:30 every morning. The smell of diesel exhaust and dust became constant reminders that Becca would destroy the peaceful countryside to protect her theft. Daniel Rodriguez received death threats complete with family photos marked with red X's, witness intimidation that crossed federal lines into terrorism territory. His employer got pressured to fire him for unreliable behavior, forcing FBI to place Daniel in witness protection. Becca's desperation reached pathetic levels when she contacted my adult sons in Colorado and Florida, claiming their father was having a mental breakdown and suggesting guardianship proceedings to protect his assets. She implied I was dishonoring Helen's memory by fighting for family land, psychological manipulation that would make cult leaders take notes. The insurance scam exposure came when Jessica discovered Riverside Gardens policies were printed on stolen letterhead from legitimate companies. Residents' homeowner insurance would be denied because the policies never existed, leaving families facing financial disaster without coverage. Thomas filed emergency motions to halt federal investigation, court shopping for friendly judges and claiming agencies lacked jurisdiction over local property disputes. He submitted dozens of procedural motions designed to delay and confuse. Procedural warfare that made tax code look simple. Festival Day crystallized into the final battleground where truth would face suburban lies under bright Kentucky sunshine. Media crews arrived like cavalry reinforcements. Federal agents positioned discreetly, and community tension reached breaking point. The sweet smell of funnel cakes and innocent laughter of children would soon mix with the bitter taste of exposed corruption, and federal justice served cold. Festival Day morning broke with the kind of oppressive humidity that makes Kentucky summers. Legendary and tempers shorter than a roadside firecracker. Riverside Gardens looked like Norman Rockwell's fever dream. Red, white, and blue bunting draped over stolen land, children's laughter echoing across wetlands that had been murdered for suburban sprawl. Becca orchestrated her final performance at the festival gazebo, staging a public settlement meeting with all the subtlety of a Broadway musical. She'd brought microphones, speakers, and an oversized cardboard check for $350,000, playing to cameras like she was accepting an Academy Award for Best Supporting Victim. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to the gathering crowd, dabbing her eyes with tissues that looked suspiciously dry. "I'm here to demonstrate how reasonable people can resolve conflicts without destroying families." The oversized check fluttered in the breeze like a surrender flag made of lies. I played my part in this theatrical farce, pretending to consider her offer while federal agents positioned around the festival like pieces on a chessboard. The smell of barbecue smoke and cotton candy couldn't mask the metallic taste of justice, approaching faster than a summer thunderstorm. Dr. Sarah Lightfoot arrived discreetly during the children's puppet show, carrying EPA testing equipment disguised in a family picnic basket. She began soil and water sampling around the festival area, discovering fresh concrete poured over wetlands overnight. Evidence tampering that added federal obstruction charges to the growing list. Jessica's financial investigation had uncovered the international money laundering connection that morning. Riverside Gardens was funded through Ukrainian shell companies connected to a real estate fraud ring operating in 15 states. Thomas Whitmore wasn't just a small-town crook. He was connected to an international criminal enterprise that made local corruption look like shoplifting candy bars. Maria Santos, the elementary school teacher who lived in Riverside Gardens with her 3 young daughters, approached Jessica during the face-painting activity. Her hands trembled as she showed forged notary signatures on her deed, recognizing Thomas's handwriting from his campaign materials. "I trusted them," Maria whispered, glancing nervously at her children getting butterfly designs painted on their cheeks. "They said we were buying our forever home, but everything was lies." Her courage would become the crack that shattered Becca's facade of community protection. The media ambush came during the lunch hour when Thomas arranged a surprise television interview to attack my credibility. Channel 9's cameras rolled as he portrayed me as a confused elderly man, endangering innocent families with delusions about property ownership that threatened children's safety. The interview was interrupted by federal marshals serving arrest warrants live on television. Thomas's face transformed from smug confidence to panic faster than a teenager caught shoplifting as handcuffs clicked around his wrists during the broadcast. His protests about deep state conspiracies and government overreach played perfectly for evening news sound bites. Becca's meltdown began when she realized Thomas's arrest exposed their entire conspiracy. Standing beside the bounce house where toddlers played innocent games, she started screaming at federal agents about constitutional rights and government persecution. Her accusations that EPA was part of a liberal conspiracy against honest Americans got recorded by dozens of phones, creating viral social media content that destroyed any remaining credibility. Jessica's newspaper released the complete evidence package online, while families ate barbecue and checked their phones. Interactive timelines showed 5 years of fraud conspiracy. Financial records proved international money laundering, and document comparisons revealed systematic forgery. The internet moved faster than small-town gossip, spreading truth that couldn't be contained by local corruption. Reverend Mitchell organized an emergency resident meeting at the Baptist Church, providing sanctuary for displaced families, while legal aid volunteers offered free consultation. Local businesses stepped up with job offers for residents facing financial crisis, proving that genuine community spirit could survive suburban cancer. EPA testing revealed groundwater contamination affecting the entire area, forcing immediate evacuation of Riverside Gardens families to local hotels at federal expense. The water supply was declared unsafe, and cleanup estimates reached $30 million for environmental restoration that could take decades. U.S. Marshals secured Riverside Gardens as a federal crime scene, giving residents 48 hours to remove personal belongings before evidence collection began. The subdivision that had represented stolen American dreams became a monument to the consequences of greed disguised as community development. The corruption web unraveled faster than cheap yarn. County Sheriff Robert Whitmore got arrested for accepting bribes. 4 city council members faced federal charges for money laundering, and the bank president was indicted for mortgage fraud. FBI opened investigations into all Whitmore business dealings, discovering systematic theft spanning 3 decades. Becca's desperate flight attempt came as federal agents tightened the noose. Airport security caught her at Louisville International, with suitcases containing $2.8 million in bearer bonds, claiming the money was retirement savings despite no legitimate income source. The bonds traced to Cayman Islands accounts connected to the Ukrainian money laundering network. National media trucks arrived as the story gained momentum, transforming a small-town festival into a circus of justice that would make constitutional law professors assign case studies for years. Social media hashtags, Chonker Riverside Scam and Turn Justice for Ike trended nationally, proving that authentic David versus Goliath stories still captured American hearts. The stage was set for public confrontation that would expose decades of corruption while cameras rolled. The festival gazebo transformed into an impromptu courthouse as federal agents, media crews, and half the county gathered for a showdown that would make Wild West historians jealous. The sweet smell of funnel cakes mixed with the acrid tension of exposed corruption, while children's laughter provided an innocent soundtrack to the collapse of Riverside Gardens' criminal empire. I stepped to the microphone, wearing my grandfather's surveyor compass around my neck like a talisman, holding the original 1922 railroad easement document that would change everything. My voice carried across the crowd without amplification. 42 years of calling property boundaries had taught me how to project authority. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, looking directly at Becca, who stood frozen like a deer in headlights. I'm here to set the record straight about my family's land and the criminals who thought they could steal it. The crowd fell silent except for the distant hum of federal agents' radios and the flutter of evidence papers in the Kentucky breeze. I read key passages from my grandfather's contract aloud, explaining how the 1922 railroad easement automatically transferred ownership of any unauthorized construction to the Blackwood family. Every house, every streetlight, every blade of grass in Riverside Gardens belongs to me under federal law, I announced, holding up the yellowed document like Moses presenting the 10 Commandments. My grandfather was smart enough to protect our family from exactly this kind of theft. Becca pushed through the crowd like a woman possessed, grabbing the microphone with the desperation of someone watching their empire crumble in real time. This is all lies and fake documents, she screamed, her carefully maintained suburban composure finally cracking like cheap veneer. These people are part of a conspiracy against working families. That's when U.S. Attorney Marcus Webb stepped forward with arrest warrants, his federal authority cutting through local corruption like a hot knife through butter. The crowd watched in stunned silence as he read charges against Rebecca Whitmore, 52 counts including fraud, money laundering, environmental crimes, and conspiracy to commit theft. You have the right to remain silent, Marcus said, as federal marshals placed handcuffs on Becca's wrists. Her perfectly manicured hands looked almost fragile in the metal restraints, a fitting symbol of how delicate her criminal enterprise had always been. Riverside Gardens residents reacted with confusion and anger that split the crowd faster than a lightning strike. Maria Santos stepped forward to speak for families who'd been victimized by their own American dream. We just wanted homes for our children, she said, her voice trembling with emotion and betrayal. We didn't know about any fraud. We trusted these people with our life savings. Some residents turned their anger toward Becca, finally understanding how thoroughly they'd been manipulated. while others defended her out of desperate hope that their property investments weren't worthless. The community division was painful to watch. Good people torn apart by criminals who'd hidden behind suburban respectability. I took the microphone back, addressing the confused families with the compassion Helen had taught me. You folks are victims too. This isn't your fault. We'll work together to make this right. I'm offering fair rent-to-own agreements for anyone who wants to stay while we sort out the legal mess. Dr. Sarah Lightfoot chose that moment to drop the environmental bombshell, presenting soil contamination findings that silenced even the most defensive residents. The subdivision was built over toxic waste from an old chemical plant, with groundwater contamination extending far beyond Riverside Gardens' boundaries. All residents must evacuate immediately for health safety, Dr. Lightfoot announced, her EPA authority brooking no argument. The water supply is contaminated and the soil contains chemicals that pose serious health risks, especially to children. The media feeding frenzy exploded as reporters fired questions faster than an auctioneer's chant. How did county officials miss such obvious fraud? What's the total financial damage to victims? Will this lead to federal oversight of rural development? The story was becoming a national symbol of small-town corruption and environmental destruction. County Sheriff Robert Whitmore arrived with backup officers, attempting to assert local authority over federal agents in a jurisdictional contest that would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. He discovered he was also under investigation for accepting bribes when federal marshals handed him his own arrest warrant. Jessica stepped forward to provide context for the gathered media, explaining how her investigation had uncovered a conspiracy spanning 5 years and multiple states. She credited Daniel Rodriguez's courage in exposing construction fraud and environmental cover-ups that endangered public health. The mic drop moment came when I pulled out my surveyor's measuring tape and walked to the property line, demonstrating exactly where Riverside Gardens sat on Blackwood land. This tape measure doesn't lie, unlike some people, I said, looking directly at Becca, who was being loaded into a federal transport vehicle. From the back of the police car, Becca screamed, her final outburst, "These people don't deserve nice homes anyway." The racial slurs that followed, directed at Hispanic families in the crowd, revealed the true character behind her suburban mask and confirmed the discriminatory motives Jessica had suspected all along. Festival Day had become a public execution of corruption, broadcast live across social media and picked up by national news networks. Justice served cold with a side of environmental protection, all witnessed by half of Kentucky. 7 months later, Riverside Gardens stood like a suburban ghost town. Yellow EPA tape fluttered in the Kentucky breeze where manicured lawns once spread their artificial perfection. The sweet scent of jasmine had returned, mixing with morning dew and the earthy smell of healthy soil as nature reclaimed stolen land. My cattle grazed peacefully where cookie-cutter McMansions once squatted like architectural tumors, proving that good land always outlasts bad ideas. The legal aftermath delivered justice with federal efficiency that would make Helen smile from heaven. Becca Whitmore got 18 years in federal prison. Apparently, orange jumpsuits don't come with HOA badges. Thomas received 25 years for racketeering, while Sheriff Robert Whitmore and 4 city council members earned 7-year vacations courtesy of the federal penitentiary system. New oversight requirements mean future property thieves will need better lawyers and bigger bribes. 28 Riverside Gardens families accepted my rent-to-own offers, building sustainable homes on properly zoned land that respected environmental regulations and actual property rights. Maria Santos became our community liaison, her children now playing in clean streams where toxic runoff once flowed. Watching kids catch salamanders in restored wetlands reminded me why we fought so hard. The Blackwood Foundation launched with $25 million from the property windfall, funding scholarships for first-generation college students who understand that honest work beats suburban scheming every time. The Helen Blackwood Memorial Library anchors Millfield Springs downtown, offering free legal aid clinics that help property owners protect themselves from corporate predators with clipboards and fake smiles. 500 acres became the Blackwood Wildlife Sanctuary, protecting endangered turtles and wetlands that educate future generations about environmental stewardship. The Climate Research Station attracts scientists from 4 universities, proving conservation and education create more jobs than fraudulent development ever could. Jessica's Pulitzer Prize launched her Washington Post career, but she returns annually for our Blackwood Heritage Festival. Her Emmy-winning documentary about Riverside Gardens became required viewing in journalism schools, teaching students that good reporting can literally save communities from destruction. Daniel Rodriguez testified before Congress about construction, corruption, strengthening whistleblower protections that bear his name. His environmental restoration company employs other workers who chose conscience over corporate pressure. Turns out honesty pays better than fraud with significantly less risk of federal prosecution. The national impact exceeded our expectations. FBI investigations uncovered similar schemes in 53 communities, shutting down $2.8 billion in fraudulent developments. Congressional task forces created federal property verification requirements that protect families from professional thieves, masquerading as community developers. I teach surveying at the community college now, sharing 42 years of experience with students who will protect the next generation from boundary disputes and property fraud. Key lesson: accurate measurements and honest documentation built America. Everything else is just expensive decoration. Our annual Heritage Festival celebrates authentic local history with crafts, music, and storytelling that honor genuine community values. Former enemies collaborate on planning committees, proving shared purpose heals divisions created by greed faster than any therapy session. Environmental recovery exceeded our wildest hopes. Endangered species return to restored wetlands. Educational boardwalks allow school groups to study ecosystem recovery. Research data helps farmers adapt to climate change while protecting sensitive habitats. The metallic taste of morning mist over healthy wetlands beats suburban chlorine any day. Personal healing came like Kentucky sunrise, gradually then suddenly painting everything in colors Helen loved. I visit her grave each evening, reporting community progress and scholarship recipients who benefit from our stand against corruption. Her journal's final entry still guides me. Ike fights for what's right, not what's easy. Here's what this taught me. Standing up for what's right often means standing alone initially, but honest documentation and principled allies attract good people to your cause. My grandfather understood that land represents responsibility to future generations, who deserve better than environmental destruction, disguised as progress. Property rights matter, because they protect families from predators who exploit the American dream for profit. When someone tries to steal your land, they're stealing your family's history and your children's future. Have you battled HOA nightmares or property disputes? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might provide the courage another family needs to fight back against professional thieves hiding behind community development. Together we can expose fraud before it destroys more families. Subscribe to Property Justice Stories for more tales of ordinary people defeating extraordinary corruption. Your support helps us investigate small-town fraud, proving that justice prevails when honest folks unite against suburban schemes and environmental destruction. Thanks for reading Property Justice Stories. If this episode made you laugh or shake your head at HOA madness, hit that like button and drop your opinion below. We post HOA Karen chaos and neighborhood showdowns every week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the next unbelievable story.